Player says and the abbot said to me, Andreas. Option 1 of 3 I don't want you distracting the sisters in the library. Option 2 of 3 I need you to finish this commission by the end of April. Option 3 of 3 keep your conversations with Brother Piero to a minimum. Beatrice says Brother Piero is such a source of wisdom and encouragement for you, though. Socrates says indeed, but the rule of the Christian contemplative life demands that the brothers not engage in idle chatter. Saint Grobian says Jesus Christ, what a pack of dullards. Be happy you're only stuck there for a few more months, Andreas. Prester John says how did you reply to the abbot, Andreas? Option 1 of 3 I apologized and said I'd avoid unnecessary conversations in the future. Option 2 of 3 I replied that the rule was for him, not for me. I'm an artist, not a monk. Options, main language, master music volume. Options. Option 3 of 3 I just nodded and kept working. Option 2 of 3 Saint Grobian says and thank Christ for that, ha. Socrates says his calling is to God, yours is to your labor and the illumination that it brings. Beatrice says it's the abbot's house, so everyone has to play by his rules, or rather, the rule. Prester John says despite the abbot's ire, you must endure. Soon you will have finished both the abbot's work as well as your masterpiece. Options, length, master, and music volume, options. Prester John says and then you will return to Nuremberg, where marriage and your new life as a master await you. Beatrice says yes, marriage to someone he has never met. Hardly ideal. Socrates says well, the alternative is becoming a philosopher. Saint Grobian says oh, Jesus, then you should definitely get married. Is she pretty, at least? Option 1 of 3 that's what my brother said in his letter, but maybe he's just trying to lift my spirits. Option 2 of 3 the small portrait they sent was lovely, but we artists can be flatterers. Option 3 of 3 oh, who knows? That's not why I'm doing it, anyway. Option, Prester John says it is growing late. The wheel of time stops for no man, Andreas. I fear you must leave us. Player says true, your majesty. Prester John says will you visit us again soon? Option 1 of 3 hopefully, but it's out of my control, your majesty. Option 2 of 3 I don't know, your majesty. Option 3 of 3 well, I can't always dream of this place, your majesty. Prester John says of course. If you are not here tomorrow night, I pray you will be someplace as pleasant. Grobian, please see Andreas safely home. Saint Grobian says of course, your majesty. Prester John says until next time, Andreas. Player says until next time, your majesty. Saint Grobian says pay no mind to the other fools, Andreas. Player says I never do. At least I would if they'd stop stepping on my feet. Watch where you're going. Saint Grobian says he. They're fools, Andreas. No point in trying to teach them anything. I know old John wants you to endure the abbot's shit, but since I take you home, I get the last word. Don't let him run you rag, boy. Option 1 of 3 I won't. The abbot can't push me around. Option 2 of 3 he's just trying to keep order in the abbey. I'm an outsider. Option 3 of 3 it will be fine. I don't want to cause any trouble. Saint Grobian says that's no way to think about it. You need to stand up for yourself. Player says God. Would you please ST? I give up. Take me home, Grovian. Saint Grovian says he. As you wish, Andreas. Player says good morning, Ursula. Ursula says go Endurer. Player says time to get up. Quests. Journal. Journal. Player says I really should clean this up. The Picatrix, Key of Solomon, the Heptameron. Prior Ferenc keeps giving me all of these books to read. Go to bed. Player says I'm not tired yet. Perhaps after Compline, Gertner House. Ursula says Andreas, PPPBB, Ursula. Gertner guest room. Clara. Clara says good morning, Andreas. Did you sleep well? Option 1 of 3, quite well actually. Thank you. Clara says oh, I'm so glad to hear it. Anyway, I know you'll be off to the Abbey, so I packed you some food. Almonds, cheese, and some of the rye you like from the Albans. Otto wanted me to ask you to join him for dinner at the Abbey. Eva says Otto stopped by. Clara says yes, around dawn. Here you are, Andreas. Option 1 of 2, that's too kind of you, Clara. Many thanks. Clara says Master Andreas, if it wouldn't be too much trouble could I mean, could we? Would it be too much trouble if you paid next month's rent today? And if we raised it by 2 groschen? I hate to ask, but we're behind on our taxes to the Abbey. 2 months behind. Peter's losing his hair over it. Even more than usual, I mean. Option 1 of 4, of course. It's no problem at all. Besides, we wouldn't want Peter to lose any more of his precious hair. Option 4 of 4, well, wait, were these taxes unexpected? Player says I'm not sure how to respond to this. Rent wasn't due until the beginning of May. Option 1 of 3, be generous, Andreas. You can spare the money and it will ease their burden. Option 3 of Option 1 of 2, I should just ask why they were surprised by their taxes. Option Player says she might be offended, but I should maintain some distance from their problems. Option 1 of 4, of course. It's no problem at all. Besides, we wouldn't want Peter to lose any more of his precious hair. Clara says oh, God bless you, Andreas. And may Saint Luke watch over you today. Speaking of Saint Luke, how is your masterpiece coming along? It's been 2 months now, hasn't it? Player says slowly, I'm afraid. Most of my days are spent doing work for the Abbey. It's only during the divine office that Prior Ferenc allows me to work on my masterpiece. A reasonable restriction, but slow going. The city council doesn't require it to become a master. I'm making it mostly to show clients, and for my own sake. And yes, when I do finish, I will go back to Nuremberg, where I will marry and open a workshop of my own. Clara says from Nuremberg to a university and now traveling the world as an artist. What a life you have ahead of you, Master Andreas. Player says yes, I suppose it does feel like I'm starting a new chapter in my life after. Option 1 of 3, a few missteps. Option 3 of 3, a little too much fun. Clara says it must be rather frightening, Starting all over again. Option 1 of 2, I owe it to my family to make something of my life. Option 2 of 2, it is, but I know now that this is what I want to do. Player says not many people get to decide that. Clara says certainly not anyone in Tassing. Anyway, I don't know anything about art, but I've seen you sketching such beautiful things in your little book. Your masterpiece must be wonderful. Option 1 of 3, it is. It's my finest work. Clara says good. It makes me glad to see some confidence in the men around here sometimes. Now, I have to get back to my own work. Have a good day at the Abbey, Andreas, and we'll see you after Vespers for supper. Player says not tonight, but thank you. Klaus Drucker invited me over for supper. Clara says of course. Please say hello to the Druckers for us. Player says of course. Until later, Clara. Gertner Farm. Clara, Eva. Eva says hello, Andreas. Clara, Gertner Farm, Gertner Farm. Big Jurg says morning, Andreas. Player says morning, Big Jurg. How's it going? You working today? Big Jurg says just taking a rest for a bit. Dad's still in the field, he hit a big rock with the plow and it took me Lord knows how long to pull it out. You off to the Abbey? Option 1 of 2 every day but Sunday. Big Jurg says right. Thank God for Sundays. Smells like a storm's coming, no. Player says huh. Just smells like fresh alpine air to me. Big Jurg says you've been traveling too much. Where was it you spent your wanderjar before you came to Tassing? Option 1 of 3 Basel. Andreas knows some Italian and French and can reference cultural touchstones from Basel and nearby Bern, Zurich, and Freiburg. Option 2 of 3 Flanders. Andreas knows some Dutch and French and can reference cultural touchstones from Antwerp, Bruges, and Ghent. Option 3 of 3 Italy. Andreas knows Italian, a little Greek, and can reference cultural touchstones from Florence, Venice, and Milan. Player says Italy. Florence for a while, but Venice, and Milan as well. Big Jurg says Italy. No wonder your senses are dull. You've been down there too long. Spend enough time in these mountains and you'll be able to smell a storm coming. Player says how long will that take? Big Jurg says 10, 15 years. Player says I don't think I have that long, Big Jurg. Big Jurg says what'd you spend all that time in Italy doing, anyway? Other than art, I mean. Option 1 of 5 Hedonist. Andreas seeks out pleasure wherever he goes. He is extremely social and quite experienced in all of the enjoyable vices of the world. Option 2 of 5 Craftsman. Andreas lives to work and dedicates all of his time to his art. Option 3 of 5 Bookworm. Andreas spends all of his non-working free time finding and reading as many books as he possibly can. Option 4 of 5 Rapscallion. Andreas has a penchant for getting involved in petty schemes, pranks, minor crimes, and fist fight. Option 5 of 5 Businessman. Andreas devotes much of his time to self-promotion, optimizing business expenses, making investments, and balancing his books. Option 4 of 5 Rapscallion. Andreas has a penchant for getting involved in petty schemes, pranks, minor crimes, and fist fights. Player says getting into trouble. I got involved in a scheme or two. A bit of mischief. More than a few brawls. Street fighting is a sort of pastime on the Italian peninsula. Just a little fun, really. Big Jurg says sounds like a strange way to pass the time, Andreas. Anyway, I have to get going. Peter says Jurg. Big Jurg says Dad's already acting like I'm taking too long even though I did all the work to get that rock out. See you later, Andreas. Player says until later. Big Jurg. Gertner how, Peter. Peter says Andreas. Il Peter. Il Peter says God bless you, Ah. Player says. Andreas. Peter says ah. Oh. Yes, Andreas, this weather's been god awful. This town's gone to shit since my days. Option 1 of 2 I don't think the townsfolk can do much about the weather. Option 2 of 2 were things very different when you were young? Peter says as different as beer and piss. The old abbot didn't bother us much about our customs, he didn't mind if we left a little offering to Krishna to keep the skies clear, the weather fair. Matthias knew that Christ was in our hearts even if the white lady's name was on our lips. Option 1 of 4 the church banned all observances of pagan gods, Peter. Option 2 of 4 what sort of old customs? Option 3 of 4 I thought Saint Moritz protected Tassing. Peter says yes, and Saint Sasha, too. But who do you think protected it before they came along? The saints weren't the first to watch over Tassing. My father knew that. Old Rannig Kemper knew that. That bastard abbot may not like it, but some of us keep the traditions alive. Option 1 of 3 like the old widow, Ilya. Peter says yes, yes. She always hangs the door frame with lavender to keep the spirits out. Option 1 of 3 even if it doesn't help with spirits, it does smell nice. Peter says I suppose. I just know it helps with ghosts and witches and whatnot. Cough cough. Player says I should go. Peter says Alright. God bless you. Peter, Gertner House, Big Yurd, Town Commons. Andries says hello, Andreas, Gertner Farm. Player says Andries Schmidt Smithy. It's so much smaller than the one he uses at the Abbey. Gertner Farm. Veronica says Martin, please. Can you give me a hand here? Martin says what do you want? I'm keeping an eye on them. Veronica says that looks a lot like standing there and doing nothing. Hetty says Martin. For Christ's sake, help your cousin. Veronica says morning Andreas. Excuse us. One of the fence rails fell and the sheep started hopping it. Option 1 of 3 is there something I can do to help? Option 3 of 3 Martin, idiot, you going? Player says should I offer to help? Option 1 of 2 perhaps. Helping others also helps us. It allows us to feel useful and take satisfaction in our work. Option 2 of 2 that idiot Martin should be helping them. Yell at him, give him a good scare. Hee. Player says wait, that's presumptuous. I'm not close to their family. Option 1 of 3 is there something I can do to help? Option Martin says mind your own business, asshole. Veronica says Martin. That's enough, and Andreas, leave the discipline to my mother. Hetty says oh, look, there's something going on up at the Steinauer's place. Martin says who's that on the horse? Looks rich. Hetty says I don't know, Martin, but Lucky is giving him an earful. Christ, I haven't seen Lucky that worked up since Peter and Clara's wedding when Yuan pulled his pants down. Knocked 2 of my man's teeth out. You don't want to feel the strength behind a stonemason's anger. Martin says do you think he's a noble? He looks really rich. Hetty says god damn it, Martin. Stay out of trouble for once. Martin says what, Aunt Hetty? Veronica says behave yourself. Don't we have enough to deal with right now? Hetty says Andreas, if you wouldn't mind moving your skinny little body up the road, we need to get these sheep under control. Player says of course. See you later. Option 1 of 3 don't work too hard, Martin. Martin says head. Martin says what? Hetty says hey, Andreas. Veronica says hello, Andreas. Church and Druckers. Drucker house. Claus says morning, Andreas. How's it going? Player says morning, Claus. Another day at the Abbey, another few hours to work on my masterpiece. Claus says good to hear. You still coming by for supper tonight? Marie and Bert would love to see you. You really need to see these new woodcuts I have for an Italian edition of Till You'll Gel. Player says I didn't realize Father Thomas let you print books in Italian. Claus says come on, Andreas, he's not that strict. I know he's just trying to protect people from Option 1 of 4 heresy. Option 2 of 4 witch mania. Option 3 of 4 adventure stories of questionable moral. Claus says he doesn't mind those so much, actually. Player says no. Claus says as long as they don't get too carnal. Player says oh. Claus says so, supper tonight, after Vespers. Option 1 of 2, of course. Thank you. Claus says great. I'll tell Marie and Bert you're coming. See you then. Player says see you later. Claus says morning, Andreas. Thomas says God bless, Master Maler. I hope your week is going well. Option 1 of 2 thank you, Father. It's going quite well. I'm just on my way up the hill to get to work. Option 2 of 2 thank you, Father, but I'm running late to the Abbey. Thomas says it's no problem if you don't have time for me today, but the question is, will you have time for the Lord on Sunday? You understand how important it is for your salvation that you receive Holy Communion, don't you? Option 1 of 3 yes. I apologize, Father Thomas. I promise you I'll make it this Sunday. Option 2 of 3 I do, but I've been working on sketches late at night. Thomas says Andreas, this is about more than your success in this life. There is Anno. Oh, my. What a blessed day to receive such an illustrious visitor. Master Maler, this is Lorenz, Baron of Rothvogel, a great lord from the countryside near Worms. Lorenz says good to see you, Father Thomas. It is nice to be remembered fondly. I only wish all of your neighbors were as welcoming. Thomas says well, what brings you back to our little town? Lorenz says my wife and I were returning from a trip to Venice. We spent a few days in Innsbruck and it was terribly dull. I mean, it has a certain charm common to these Alpine cities, but the place was crawling with nobles for the emperor's diet. Thomas says the emperor. Was he there? Did you see him? Lorenz says oh, briefly, but he was sitting for a portrait at the time. Quite lovely. I didn't want to bother him or the painter. Option 1 of 4 who was the artist? Option 3 of 4 how was Venice, my lord? I lived there only a few years ago. Lorenz says oh, fascinating. Well, the city's Jews now live in their own quarter in the north. The city's artists are still producing wonderful work. Titian, in particular, is a god. No offense, Father. Thomas says of course. Lorenz says anyway, my wife wanted to stay a bit longer in Innsbruck and I decided to ride ahead to make a visit to Kiersau. I heard Father Matthias died shortly after my last visit, of course. Thomas says a great loss for the Abbey and for us all. Lorenz says indeed. By good fortune, I recently came across a copy of the Historia Tascia he was reading during my last visit. Father Matthias was hoping to find a second copy to corroborate the contents of the first. It contains some fascinating details about the history of this place. I'm afraid they might even cause a bit of a scandal. Thomas says, ah, yes. Lorenz says, but I must be off. There will be time enough to discuss Tassing's past later. I commissioned a manuscript from the Abbey through Father Gernot and I have come to check on its progress. Thomas says, oh. My lord, if you have come to see your manuscript, you should speak with young Master Maler here. Option 1 of 2, not quite a true master yet. I still have to marry and be approved by our city council. Option 2 of Thomas says Andreas is a journeyman artist from Nuremberg. For the next few months, he's also helping in the Abbey's scriptorium. Lorenz says a Nuremberger artist working in an Abbey scriptorium. In 1518? Oh, we should talk, Andreas. I must know the story. Option 1 of 3, of course my lord. It would be an honor. Option 2 of 3, well, I'm already late to the Abbey but I suppose it's alright. Option 3 of 3, surely my lord would find little entertainment or companionship in me. Lorenz says I have yet to judge the quality of your entertainment, though it sounds like we're off to a bad start. Thank you for the introduction, Father Thomas. Come to supper at the Abbey tonight. I'm inviting you to the abbot's table. Thomas says is. Did the abbot invite me? Lorenz says oh, don't worry about it, Father. Just show up after Vespers. What is he going to do, refuse us? Thomas says I. Lorenz says excellent. We will see you then. My claws, I'm dismounting. Run ahead of us and take the horses to the Abbey's guest house. I'd like to take my time talking with Master Maler. I'll meet you there, my claws says at once, my lord. Lorenz says so then, a journeyman from Nuremberg. Forgive me for saying so, but you seem a little old to not yet be a master. Are you unmarried? Player says no, I'm not married, but in truth I came to my vocation later than my father and brothers. I was in university for a number of years, at Erfurt. Lorenz says Erfurt. Wonderful. The same university as Martin Luther. Have you read his works? Tremendous mind. He says things about the church that should have been said years ago. Might get him into trouble, but he's a brave, brilliant man. Wait, you may have even met him. Did you? You must tell me. Player says ah, no. He was a few years ahead of me. Option 1 of 2 still, his ideas do seem fascinating. Option 2 of 2, his ideas don't hold much interest for me, I'm afraid. Lorenz says oh, nonsense. Even if you disagree with him, how can the ideas not hold your interest? I wonder if the good brothers of the Abbey have heard of him. Perhaps they have even read his list of 95 theses against the church. Father Matthias was not above having a lively debate. I hope Father Gernot does not disappoint in that regard. But enough about Luther for now. Tell me about your university studies. Option 1 of 2, forgive me, Baron, but did you attend university? You seem very well educated. Lorenz says ha. No. My family is merely wealthy enough to have provided me with all of the books and tutors a child could dream of. I love all knowledge, from Aristotle and Cicero to Ficino and Erasmus, and everyone in between and yet to come. Player says I may have misjudged the Baron. It seems he is as well read as any university student. Lorenz says in truth, I am simply happy to speak with another well-educated man. Now then, did you earn your doctorate? Player says I know, I didn't. Only a master's degree. I started working toward a doctorate, but didn't finish. Lorenz says oh, that's a shame. Well, what was your area of study? Option 1 of 3 Theology. Andreas has a strong understanding of Catholic theology, biblical knowledge, canon law, heresies, and similar subjects. Option 2 of 3 Imperial Law. Andreas knows the basics of the fractured systems of laws that govern the various states of the Holy Roman Empire. Option 3 of 3 Medicine. Andreas is familiar with the basics of human biology, medicine, and illness. Option 1 of 3 Theology. Andreas has a strong understanding of Catholic theology, biblical knowledge, canon law, heresies, and similar subjects. Player says theology, as odd as that may seem. Lawrence says not odd at all. It's a good field of study if you want a position in the church. My late uncle was the abbot of Fulda. I spent many hours reading the manuscripts in their library with his permission. He was a pious enough man, I suppose, but he wielded great power from that abbey. Audelia says you. If I had any faith I would have prayed you'd never show your face here again. Curse you, Lawrence Rothvogel. Perchtas dogs tearing you to pieces would be too kind of fate. Lawrence says these rustic communities display a shocking lack of hospitality, don't you think? Option 1 of 2 What was that about? Lawrence says who knows? By the time I finish guessing, the old crone will probably be dead. Well, what of your early time in university? Every student must study the trivium and quadrivium, yes. Did you have a favorite subject? Option 1 of 5 Latinist. Andreas has a strong command of Latin grammar and vocabulary. He can also easily recall sententiae antiqui, quoted words of wisdom from the Roman Republic and Empire. Option 2 of 5 Logician. Andreas instinctively thinks through the implications of information as he receives it, is adept at spatial analysis, and can easily perform complicated calculations. Option 3 of 5 Orator. Andreas excelled at rhetoric in university. He is a skilled teacher, persuader, and public speaker. Option 4 of 5 Occultist. Andreas knows a soul-endangering amount of theoretical and practical knowledge on alchemy, astrology, theurgy, necromancy, and various magical rites and ceremonies. Option 5 of 5 Heavens and Earth. Andreas knows a great deal about the constellations, heavenly bodies, and their movement. He is also familiar with various plants and animals from study and personal experience. Option 4 of 5 Occultist. Player says I used my access to the university's library to pursue more esoteric interests. Lawrence says oh? Esoteric how? Player says mystical texts. Books on alchemy, invoking spirits, divination, purely academic, of course. Lawrence says of course. Player says I started with Ficino's Corpus Hermeticum and my interest only deepened from there. Lawrence says quite interesting, Andreas. I'll make some time to speak with you more on this topic during my stay. Option 1 of 3 I look forward to it, my lord. Lawrence says and your other studies? Was there anything else you excelled at? Option 1 of 4 Latinist. Andreas has a strong command of Latin grammar and vocabulary. Option 2 of 4 Logician. Andreas instinctively thinks through the Player says logic, geometry, and arithmetic. Lawrence says quite interesting for an artist. Was Aristotle's Organon the foundation of your study? Player says yes, the Organon for logic and Euclid's Elements for geometry, but the past few centuries have yielded wonderful new texts on logic. Peter Abelard provided the foundation of scholastic philosophy and established the primacy of Aristotle's work. The Englishman William of Ockham gave us the Summa Logicae, arguing nominalism against Platonic realism. And of course Thomas Aquinas gave us the tools to employ both faith and reason in the pursuit of truth. Lawrence says all monks and friars, of course. A great deal of work to force Aristotle to fit within the Church's vision of truth. Player says is that so wrong? Lawrence says I question that these great men should have had to wrestle logic into what the Church established by fiat and force. Ah, there's the Abbey. I have good memories of this place, and of Father Matthias. I was sad to hear of his passing. Player says how did you come to know him? How did you come to know of Kiersau at all? Lorenz says my family have been patrons of Kiersau for, oh I don't know how many generations. Some years ago I heard that Kiersau still had a wonderful library and artisans. Professional artists have taken over most manuscript production, so I was shocked to find an active scriptorium here. Option 1 of 3. Well, there's not much left of it these days. 2 old men, a young scribe, and me. Option 3 of 3. The artists that remain here are quite talented, if a bit old-fashioned. Lorenz says well, Kiersau is more than a bit old-fashioned. Some of my friends think I'm mad for commissioning a manuscript from an abbey in this day and age. But, well, my family have been patrons of Kiersau for generations. It seems wrong to stop now while there's still talent here. I commissioned a manuscript through Father Gernot a year ago. I thought I would stop by and check on the progress. Wait, are you the artist working on it? It's a prayer book with 20 illustrations. Player says I know the work, but no. I do know the artist well, the venerable brother Piero. Lorenz says how venerable? Player says he still has his wits and his skills, if that's what concerns you. Brother Piero has an incredible talent with color. Lorenz says then I very much look forward to seeing it. Lorenz says my claws, tend to the horses and the baggage. I'm heading up to the abbey. My claws says yes, my lord. Lorenz says well, let's not keep the abbot waiting any longer. Nuns. Quite unusual for a Benedictine house to have monks and nuns, even if they are separated. The church closed most of them centuries ago. But then, Kiersau is a place out of time in more ways than one. Option 1 of 3. Do you know Mother Cecilia? She seemed to recognize you. Lorenz says we are acquainted, yes. Let's leave it at that. Ah, you must be Father Gernot. I am Lorenz, Baron of. Gernot says yes, the Baron of Rothvogel. So wonderful to have you here again, we actually did meet on your last visit. Lorenz says ah, if you say so. I am not good with remembering faces. Gernot says please forgive me, my lord, but I wasn't expecting you for another few days. Lorenz says yes, I know, but I rode ahead. I just couldn't wait to see my manuscript. I'm sure it's no trouble. Gernot says yes. I mean, no. It's no trouble. Did you want to see it now? Lorenz says oh, in a moment. I could do with a bit of refreshment, though. May I grab something from the kitchen? Gernot says. Yes, yes. Certainly, my lord. I will meet you there. Andreas. I don't know what you were doing with the Baron, but I need you in the scriptorium, now. Option 1 of 3, of course father. I'm eager to get to work. Option 3 of 3, is this a bad time to ask for an advance on my payment for the Book of Hours? Gernot says. RRRR. Player says I should ask again when he's in a better mood. Maybe I could just convince Brother Matthew to pay me early. If all else fails, I could liberate some money from the sacristy. A map. Church. Monastery Loquarium. Monastery Loquarium. Cloister. Chapter House. Infirm, Upper Abbey. Cloister. Infirmary. Player says Saint Luke. The patron of artists is also the patron of healers. Florian. Florian says God bless you, Andreas. Player says Brother Florian, how are you? Florian says the brothers and sisters are well, so I am well. Thank God. Andreas, have you spoken to Klaus Drucker lately? Player says yes, quite recently. Florian says I believe he may be receiving a medical text from Bologna soon. I'm quite interested in it. Player says Sai leggo l'italiano? Can you read Italian? Florian says no. Little Italian, and my Latin is not as good as I would like. I was hoping Brother Piero could help me with it, if he has the time. Player says I'm sure he will make time. He is a patient teacher. Florian says that he is. I will see you later, Andreas. Player says until then. Most of these medicines were made by Agnes Steinauerin with some help from Sister Gertrude. Maps. Florian. Cloister. Chapter House. Player says a Dance of Death mural. Father Matthias had it painted a few years before his death. It's beautiful. A Dance of Death mural. Large garden. Cloister. Refectory. Player says when the brothers eat their meals, this is where the lector reads to them. Kitchen and cellar. Lucas. Lucas says hello, Andreas. Player says how goes it in the kitchen? Is Brother Wojciech working you hard? Lucas says not too bad. Brother Wojciech is nice to me. It's Father Abbot and Brother Prior who make things hard. Player says how so? Lucas says I shouldn't complain. They just like their food a certain way and I'm not that good at cooking yet. Player says I'm sure Brother Wojciech will teach you well in Lucas says Brother Edok complains about his food, too, but he complains to Brother Wojciech. Player says what does Brother Edok know about food, anyway? He's from Cornwall. Lucas says I don't even know where that is. Player says it's a land to the west, across the sea, where all they eat is fish. Lucas says sounds miserable, but that's always what he complains about, the fish. Player says he just likes to complain, I think. Don't lose heart, Brother Lucas. You're still learning. Lucas says thanks. See you later. Player says until later. Lucas. Cellar. Wojciech says morning, Andreas. How's living with the Gertnes? Option 1 of 3 it's great. They're a lovely family. Wojciech says Clara is a good woman, and she looks after Big Jurg and Evil like they were her own. Player says they're both almost fully grown. Wojciech says true. I suppose it's less that they need looking after, more that she cares to. Little Ursula is in good hands. Anyway, if I don't see you around the Abbey later, maybe I'll see you in Tassing tomorrow. Player says until then. Wojciech. Kitchen and cellar. Large garden. Animal pens. Cemetery. Vokebird says good day, Andreas. Abattoir. Cemetery. Player says the apple trees have only started to bloom. It will be months before they bear fruit. Old Bailey. Scriptorium. Prior's house. Player says, what is this? A volvel? I've seen these before, in astronomy and medical tracts. What's this one for? 2 wheels. The top wheel has Greek letters and holes cut out to reveal Latin letters underneath. And the outer edge of the lower wheel is divided into 4 sections, each bearing an elemental symbol. Greek, Latin, and elemental symbols. It's obvious someone with occult interests fashioned this. A quarter turn of the upper disc aligns a different elemental symbol with the top of the lower disc. Option 1 of 2. Given the number of letters and the size of the discs, there's enough space for a total of 4 versions of the Latin alphabet. Option 2 of 2, and that reveals a different set of letters underneath. Option 1 of. Player says, I wonder what it's for. A cipher of some sort. I need to investigate more. This has to be connected to something else around here. Old Bailey. Scriptorium. Guy says, good day, Andreas. Player says, how is your morning going, brother Guy? Guy says, it's fine. More contracts for the abbot. Player says, which would you rather be making, contracts or manuscripts? Guy says, I honestly don't care, Andreas, as long as the abbot is impressed. He could have me write the first chapter of Genesis until Judgment Day. Player says, does the abbot's opinion mean that much to you? Guy says, the abbots and the priors, both. You're lucky. When you're done with this, you're going home. I'm never going to see Burgundy again. I need to make the best of the next 40 years. Player says, then I'll leave you to it. Edoc. Piero. Piero says, Andreas. God bless you. So good to see you. Player says, good morning, brother Piero. Good to see you as well. Edoc says, I don't like this weather. My bones ache. It means a storm is coming. Player says, Big Jörg Gertner says that if you live here 10 or 15 years, you can smell storms coming. Guy says, brother Edoc has been here long enough that we can always smell him coming. Edoc says, do not forget, brother Guy, the fate of the youths who jeered the aged prophet Elisha outside of Bethel. Player says, mauled by bears, weren't they? Piero says, she bears. Guy says, are you comparing yourself to a prophet, brother Edoc? Edoc says, I am comparing you to an impudent youth whom the Lord, in his ineffable wisdom, may choose to strike down. Option 1 of 3, brother Guy, please show more respect to brother Edoc. You're being mean-spirited. Option 2 of 3, calm yourself, brother Edoc. You're too sensitive to Guy's jokes. Edoc says, I am old, Andreas. Every slight against me stings with the fire of 1,000 wasps. But I will pray to God for the strength to endure this wickedness. Player says, well, everyone seems quite lively. I suppose that means Prior Ferenc is not overseeing us today. Guy says he was here, but then he heard Lorenz Rothvogel had arrived and he hurried out like a little mouse. Ferenc is so desperate to impress the abbot and nobles like Rothvogel. It's pathetic. Edoc says, you feign kindness to Father Abbot and our prior only to speak about them like this behind their backs. It's shameful. Piero says, oh no. Baron Rothvogel. His manuscript, I just realized that he will want to see his manuscript. How silly of me. Of course that's why he is visiting. Guy says, perhaps if you were younger and faster you wouldn't need to worry so much about patrons' visits. Option 1 of 3, what's the problem? The Baron is just one client. He has to wait like anyone else. Option 2 of 3, watch your mouth or I'll give you something to worry about. Guy says WH- threatening a monk. What's wrong with you? Player says you're the one mocking old men. What's wrong with you? Anyway, what's the problem? The Baron is just one client. He has to wait like anyone else. Edoc says Andreas, Baron Rothvogel is not like anyone else. He has powerful friends, including the Prince Bishop of Freising. Kiersau is already out of favor. Father Abbot does not want to have to deal with more attention. Player says, well, if Prior Ferenc isn't here, I'm going to work on my masterpiece until he arrives. Oh, that's right. I need to reference the Indermore manuscript. Zedna says, what do you want, Andreas? Player says, a book. The Indermore manuscript, the Book of Hours. Zedna says, your hair looks messy today. Did you get enough sleep? Option 1 of 2, could I just get the book? Zedna says, ugh. That's all that way upstairs. Can't you get by without it? Option 1 of 2, I'm sorry, but I really can't. I need to reference it for my work. Option 2 of 2, no. Why are you complaining? Isn't this your job? Zedna says, isn't writing books your job? Sister Illuminata. Andreas needs a book and he's being inappropriate with me. Illuminata says, Andreas. Option 1 of 2, Sister Illuminata. I'd like to borrow the Indermore manuscript, the Book of Hours. Illuminata says, yes, I overheard. Here. Please return it promptly. Piero says, Andreas, may I see how your masterpiece is coming? Player says, of course. Your opinion is always welcome. Piero says, yes, the composition is lovely. There is a joyful spirit in your arrangement of the figures. The contrast of colors is also quite nice. Rich and beautiful on their own, but not overpowering the scene. Option 1 of 2, Is that all? Option 2 of 2, it doesn't feel right. I don't know why. Piero says it's an excellent interpretation of someone else's work. Option 1 of 2, what do you mean? It's all my work. Piero says, my son, you're copying the illustration from the Indermore manuscript almost exactly. Player says, so? What's wrong with that? Haven't I improved on it? Piero says, aesthetically, yes. It's wonderful. But I feel you have not given much thought to what it represents. Player says, it's November. In November we show peasants leading the pigs into the forest to forage on acorns before the slaughter. Piero says, Andreas, the peasants here are no longer allowed to forage acorns in the forest. Many great lords and abbots across the empire have forbidden it, even Father Gernot. Player says, what difference does it make? This is the way November is painted. Piero says, but it is not the way November is. Piero says, art is illusion, storytelling, but in their most sublime form, these images illuminate a path to truth. Player says, it's most important to me that my clients are happy. They won't pay me for truth. Piero says, yes, but with God's grace, this book of ours will outlive us all. What will it say to those who see it in a future generation, centuries beyond our comprehension? Some will gaze deep into your lines and paint to seek a deeper meaning. What will they find? But you need not listen to my opinions. They are just the thoughts of one old monk. There is no place for the monastic scriptoria anymore. In truth, this room is a place out of time. Option 1 of 2, does that make you sad? Option 2 of 2, why is that? Why has Kiersau kept this up for so long? Piero says, some people, some places, have a difficult time letting go of the past. I am not among them. The creation of books, of art, is no longer the province of monasteries. So be it, more people will be able to write, more will be able to read and, in so doing, be brought to truth. Option 1 of 2. Don't you think there's a danger in anyone being able to write, anyone being able to read, anything? Piero says there is danger, of course, but printers are already here. We cannot roll back the wheel of time. It is left to you and the generations who follow to be good and responsible stewards for those yet to come. The rest is in God's hands. Ah, where has the time gone? It is already terse. Too much talk. I must ask forgiveness for not honoring the rule. Until later, Andreas. Player says until later. Illuminata says what's going on in here? Illuminata says Andreas, what was that noise? Player says oh. I'm sorry, Sister Illuminata. I knocked a bowl of paint to the floor. But then Prior Ferenc came in, wrote in one of his books, slammed it closed, and left. He was in such a hurry I don't think he even noticed me. Illuminata says he was slamming books shut? Prior Ferenc should know better than that. Some of these manuscripts are quite delicate. Option 1 of 2 nod. Option 2 of 2 he seemed to be in a great hurry. Illuminata says I think he is on edge since Baron Rothvogel arrived early. Which is why books should not be taken out of the library unless it is necessary for divine reading or work in the scriptorium. Option 1 of 2, are you still mad at me for borrowing the Chronica Clara? Option Illuminata says you can't be serious. You want more books? I think Prior Ferenc has given you more than enough. Option 1 of 3 I don't know what you're talking about. Option 2 of 3 I don't ask for those books. He just gives them to me and asks for my opinion. Option 3 of 3 if it's a problem, you should bring it up with Father Gernot or Mother Cecilia. Player says I'm assuming you've already talked to Prior Ferenc about it? Illuminata says I'm not questioning the prior's judgment and I'm not going to tattle to my superiors, but, as you are not a brother, I need to be more cautious about what books you take from our library, especially since you've already tricked me into giving you books that neither the prior nor the abbot gave permission for. Option 1 of 2 you really are still mad about the Chronica Clara, aren't you? Option 2 of 2 I apologize. It was unkind and unfair of me. Illuminata says I appreciate it, though you've actually done it twice. Chronica Clara was first. Diamitha's letters were the second. Do you remember? I certainly do. Option 1 of 2 they were written to her Luca, a blessed Benedictine nun. Player says frankly, I'm surprised you don't appreciate my appreciation of these holy women. Illuminata says I heard you and Edok ogling the handwriting. It was perverse. Now, if you'll excuse me. Player says wait, what's all this fuss about Lawrence Rothvogel? Why is Prior Ferenc so nervous? Illuminata says Lawrence? I didn't know you were familiar enough with the man to use his Christian name. Anyway, I haven't dealt with him, personally, but the prior and Father Abbot have. I only know that he's purchased a number of our most valuable manuscripts over the years, and he paid enough to help the Abbey when we needed it. Player says like what? What did he buy? Illuminata says I can't remember. You know, I have my own responsibilities to attend to. How about this, Andreas? If you help me recover some missing books, I'll tell you what I know about the Baron. Option 1 of 2, of course. I'll help in any way I can. Illuminata says thank you. It's for the good of the Abbey. Player says where should I begin? Illuminata says out there, where you and your cohort have carelessly strewn books around the scriptorium, I will tell you what books I'm looking for. Find them and return them to me. The first books are 2 volumes of the Aeneid. Reddish covers. 14 inches by 10 inches. 3 inches thick. Option 1 of 2 Innsbruck inches or Nuremberg inches. Option 2 of 2. I know the ones. They're among Pierrot's favorites. He keeps them by my desk. Illuminata says they are not his to keep. Illuminata. Player says there's a fair amount of wear on these. I hope you don't mind. Illuminata says those volumes were old even when Pierrot started to make the copies. Player says how long ago was that? Illuminata says 3 years. The Aeneid is not one of my favorite stories, but I understand why it appeals to Pierrot. Illuminata says Aeneas chose his duty to the gods over his lover, Dido. Player says do you think Aeneas' sense of duty appeals to Pierrot? Illuminata says we all have our vocations. Brother Pierrot takes his more seriously than most of the others in this abbey. Player says you clearly take your chosen vocation seriously. Illuminata says Andreas, I didn't have a choice in my vocation. Few women do. Option 1 of 2 well, surely it's not that dire. Illuminata says how would you know, Andreas? How could you? Men are not sorted with the same sieve of life as women are. There are fewer places where we fit. Even in stories, we are maidens to be rescued and wed, cruel seducers of men, or wizened crones. Like Dido, we ordinary women are merely tools in the tales of men. We can never be the protagonists of our own stories. No woman is exempt from that, from the empress to a nun. It is our lot. Player says I suppose I understand now why you are not fond of the Aeneid. Illuminata says it's fine poetry. For men. Now, the books, if you please. Illuminata says thank you. Next, Wretched Garin. This is a printed copy. Green cover, diamond pattern. I do not have the size in the ledger, but hopefully the description is enough. Player says I know the one you're talking about. Brother Edok was reading it. Player says the beauty of this book truly belies its ridiculous content. I'm surprised the Abbey owns a copy. Illuminata says we don't. It belongs to Amadeo Rusco of Lugano. It's a Venetian. He loaned it to us 5 years ago. It was subsequently lost and the abbot has received 3 letters about it. Player says I've certainly seen the brothers enjoying it. Illuminata says that book is not appropriate reading for Benedictine monks. Illuminata says a baby is sold to pirates, raised a servant, then lives a life of adventure wooing princesses and fighting in tournaments. Player says you forgot the best part. In the end, Garin learns he has royal blood, the son of a duke. He reigns as a king and dies a pious hermit. What's not to love? Illuminata says Benedictines should be dreaming of reconciliation with our Lord, not lusty adventures. Option 1 of 3 what's the harm? Option 2 of 3 redemption will still be waiting for them when they put down the book. Illuminata says yes, always, but they still must choose redemption. Should we go on sinning so grace will increase? Of course not. Fantasy leads to temptation. Temptation has led to the downfall of many men and women. Player says sometimes, yes. But books like this, it's all the same type of fantasy, isn't it? Illuminata says to die better than we are born. Player says and what's the problem with that? Why shouldn't a peasant dream of being a king? Illuminata says there is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Option 1 of 3. Paul's words can be hard to recall when you're suffering because of your station in life. Option 2 of 3. And yet Paul says that women must obey men. Even the Gospels can't free us from the bondage of our place in life. Illuminata says this world is not the same as the world that follows. Andreas, perhaps if you had continued to study theology you would have learned that distinction. But, the book, Andreas. We must return it? Or would you like the abbot to receive a fourth letter? Player says I hate to see the brothers disappointed, but I understand. Illuminata says it's not my goal to deprive the brothers of their joy, but to return Amadeo Rusco's property. The book, please. Illuminata says there is only one book left. Then you will be freed from bondage. A dark red cover. 8 inches high, 5 inches across, 2 inches thick. Option 1 of 2. What is it? Option 2 of 2. Oh, I remember that. I believe Brother Guy was reading it. Player says now that I think about it, Guy has always been guarded about this book, like he was hiding it. Illuminata says very good, please bring it here. Player says what is this, anyway? Maybe I should have learned French at some point. What is this? Illuminata says why are you asking so many questions? Just give it to me. Option 1 of 2. Why won't you tell me what this book is? Option 2 of 2. I haven't asked so many questions. I've asked one question twice and you haven't answered me. Illuminata says I have good reason to not answer you. Option 1 of 2. Yes. Illuminata says 3 French bishops condemned the book. All copies were to be burned. Its author shared the same fate. Player says what? What? Illuminata says I don't know, Andreas. It isn't my place to question the judgment of one bishop, much less 3. And before you ask, no, I haven't read it, but I know it contains a dialogue between love and reason. Player says so the book is dangerous. When did the bishops condemn it? Illuminata says 200 years ago. Player says what? Why? Why is it still here? Illuminata says because Father Matthias loved books. All books. He didn't want to see it destroyed. Option 1 of 3 sounds reckless. Option, Illuminata says that's fine, but Father Matthias is gone. It's not my place to question the former abbot's decision, but when Father Gernot learned it was in our possession, he wanted it destroyed. Option 1 of 4. How did Father Gernot even know the book was here? Option, Illuminata says good. It's for the best. Thank you. Illuminata. Illuminata says now then. Baron Rothvogel. Quickly, though. I need to finish up here soon. Option 1 of 4. You said that he buys books from the Abbey. What Option 2. Option 4 of 4. He mentioned finding a copy of Historia Tascia. He said it had some scandalous details in it. Player says he also mentioned that Father Matthias had a copy and was looking for another to verify its contents. Do you know anything about the book? Illuminata says I have heard of it, but I have never read it and I know little about its contents. The subject is broad, but I believe the book deals specifically with the Roman occupation of this land. Option 1 of 2. What about that could have upset Father Matthias so much? Option 2 of 2. What do you know about the Romans in Tassing? Option 1. Illuminata says I can't claim any deep insights into the former abbot's mind. I understood him to be a virtuous and charitable man, sometimes to a fault. It is not always best when an abbot considers himself a friend to his brothers instead of their shepherd. Option 1 of 2. Do you prefer Father Gernot to Father Matthias? Option 2 of 2. Could something in the book have led Father Matthias to a crisis of virtue? Illuminata says virtue is only found in crisis. Without it, virtues are little more than ideals. So, perhaps there is merit in that idea. Well, I must be off to Massachusetts. Thank you again for your help, Andreas. Player says, wait, how will you get to the church if you can't enter the scriptorium? I thought this was the only door into the library. Illuminata says we are standing in the oldest part of the abbey. And like any old place, it has its share of secrets. Good day, Andreas. God be with you. Player says that's the bell for Sext. The brothers will be sitting down for dinner soon. I should see if Otto is around and still wants to eat with me. I think he's working by the guest house below the abbey. Oh, the brothers should be in the refectory for dinner. Now is a good time to sneak into the sacristy. Options. Main menu. Options.